Quotation from myself, segment 43, quotation number 5 to 8. It is only human to try to justify injustice by finding some faults with its victims. It is also only human to conveniently forget that those faults are, in main, our own invention, and to use them as an excuse to inflict even more severe punishment on, by now obviously deserved target. The hardest thing for a victimizer is to admit, even to himself, the real reason behind his actions. Every time the new injustice done to the same victim, the new, more elaborate justification must be invented and added to the old ones, which seems by now not sufficient enough for the ever-escalating level of abuse. And also, each time, the new justification leads inevitably in turn to the new injustices, which begin to be seen by the perpetrators more and more as a well-deserved retribution. Thus, once entering into such a vicious circle of committing injustice and finding justification for it in a victim, and then believing one owns invention, committing new injustices and finding new justification for it, and so on and so forth, it is very difficult to get out of it, unless one is willing to admit being wrong and unjust from the beginning, and very few of us are capable of it. Undoubtedly, this is a universal phenomenon, for it may be observed wherever there is a victimizer and a victim, be it in a relationship between individuals, families, clans, nations, religion, ideologies, etc., and as such have to be recognized as one of the spiritual and behavioral diseases afflicting mankind. 529. Left to its own inherent internal dynamics, the homogeneous society will always psychologically reject the stranger in its midst, in the same way as the body rejects physiologically the transplanted organs, and in the same way as the body carrying these transplanted organs must be cared for by continuously administering the anti-rejection drugs, the body politic afflicted with racism has to be perpetually treated by never-ending efforts, both educational and judicial, to make the coexistence of different ethnic groups in one heterogeneous society as harmonious as is humanly possible. 530. As far as the competition between monotheism and polytheism is concerned, it may appear on the surface as if the former, for all intent and purpose, had replaced the latter. However, in reality, people who are moved more by their daily experience than by the abstract ideas could never accept that one God is capable of satisfying all their numerous and various needs. Catholicism, with its multiplicity of patron saints responsible for every conceivable kind of human action, is the best manifestation of the inherently polytheistic nature of man. Even the Jews of the Old Testament, seemingly the most staunch and consistent monotheist of all, in reality has just substituted the hundreds of different gods by the hundreds of different rules, which covered in the same way those numerous gods did for pagan all multiple aspects of their lives, in turning in the process, without realizing the blatant contradiction of such transformation, the omnipotent creator of the universe into a petty tyrant allegedly preoccupied with seemingly endless trivialities of their daily lives in exactly the same manner as old pagan gods used to do. 531. To be complete, any communication, be it verbal, visual, written, etc., requires at least two persons, and no matter how different they may be, the efforts of one are as important as those of another. 532. The pornographic movies of the so-called soft-core variety pretend to provide the answers, albeit not a very imaginative one, to an old question: what does a woman want? Sexually wise, of course. It is done invariably by the endless repetition of the few worn-out version of the fake orgasm, showing how the real woman expresses their sensual feeling when the right man finally comes along. They are also supposed to boost man's ego and ease his insecurity in the era of women's sexual liberation. However, it is doubtful that either female or male viewers are getting from these movies what they really need or want. As far as men are concerned, nobody seems to feel obliged to even ask the same question: what does a man want? For the insidious message of tremendous potentially destructive forces hidden in them is that unless ordinary man and a woman feel and act like pornographic stars, that is, like sexual maniacs in perpetual heat, something is fundamentally wrong with them. Yet, contrary to popular belief, the most damaging, and not just from men's point of view, aspect of soft-core pornographic movies is not the undeniable exploitation of women as sexual objects, but the reduction of men to even lower role of a dildo, the device for women's masturbation. They tell the average man that unless he is endowed with an oversized penis, it can make a woman moan, scream, and melt under his touch, he is certainly not the right man, and probably not a man at all. Furthermore, the additional implication of making a woman the final judge of whether the sex was good, and the male ultimately responsible for it, are even more sinister. It is no wonder then that the men, who are the heavy consumer of pornography, display much more hostility toward women, and in the extreme cases present real danger to them than men in general. It is also not uncommon for such men to develop complete aversion to sex, or even experience psychologically induced impotence from the all-pervasive fear of not being able to perform up to the standards of the pornographic movies. On the other hand, and in the totally opposite direction, some of these men become extremely promiscuous, where they develop the need to constantly prove to themselves, and to almost every woman, they meet their sexual prowess. Yet after each new encounter, these Casanovas are never absolutely sure about it, and have to do it again and again, turning in the process into the sexual maniac obsessive. All in all, the pornographic movies, especially a soft-core kind, with their deceptive to an average guy or gal appeal, do significantly greater damage, both in scope and in depth, to a woman, to a man, than to a woman. 533. I have made a pact with the world and its people, though they are not aware of it. I will obey and do what I am told to do, for I am neither a fool nor a hero, and I know they are stronger than I am. But over my thoughts and feelings, they have no power. They can have my body, but my brain and my soul belong to none but me. 534. As flesh cannot exist without skin, and skin without flesh, so attitude cannot exist without behavior, and behavior without attitude. 535. Addiction is a result of indulgence. Indulgence is caused by excessive self-love, and the excessive self-love is incompatible with and detrimental to caring for others, which brings us to the inescapable conclusion that addicts must be existential egotists. 536. The one who decides to live the righteous life sooner or later is confronted by the necessity to defend oneself from the unrighteous world. And to fight the enemy successfully, one has to use the same weapon. Failing to do that is to become unrighteous oneself, dooms one to defeat and suffering. Thus, suffering has to be accepted as an inevitable price for steadfastly remaining righteous. This world gives one only two choices: either to be a scoundrel or to become a martyr. Whatever the middle ground is left, if any, is no wider than the blade of a knife, balancing on which is extremely difficult and at times could be quite painful. 537. As opposed to the modern ones, the ancient philosophers, starting with Socrates, and probably even before him, could be characterized as the sensible pragmatist. In their view, the most important goal of philosophy was to bring happiness to its practitioners. For if it does not, what is the point of studying and practicing it? Those two elements were never separated in their minds, in contrast again to the modern philosophers. But right from the beginning they realized that a philosophically inclined man is of necessity a contemplative, and provided he is intellectually honest and consistent, a good and a just one. Such a man clearly is very vulnerable and inevitably will suffer from the external evils and, as a consequence, become an unhappy one. Thus, the obvious contradiction arises. Search for happiness leads logically to unhappiness. The most complete solution to this inherently unsolvable dilemma could be found in the teaching of the ancient Stoics. Predictably, it was totally divorced from human experience. The Stoics, probably the earliest practitioner of the Orwellian newspeak, were trying to convince themselves that pain is not pain, death is not death, etc. The suffering from external forces was declared non-existent, and the wise man was exhorted to feel happy on the wreck. Thus, in the ironic development of philosophical idea, which started as a down-to-earth pragmatism, had eventually evolved into the most contradictory wishful thinking, defying the basic common sense.